Find me a string of cities that are on hilltop fortifications, just like the Book of Mormon says, between two warring polities, right? This is the best match that there is for the Book of Mormon and what it says with Captain Moroni, right? Who builds his new line of cities across the continent, and then the wars that are fought between them. The Book of Mormon's scope really suggests that it's not just a couple little things happening right around the volcano. Like it's like over the whole face of the land, right? I think it's because this cometary impact, and it creates an atmospheric shock wave that actually creates a massive storm that arises at the same time as the earthquake and is felt on the other side of the world when Christ dies. He gathers all the people all at once. Even archaeologists are amazed. They're like, what on earth made everyone suddenly come and build this huge pre-planned city? It's like the Book of Mormon gives the best explanation. It was because, again, Anna robbers were putting so much pressure on the culture. He gathered everybody up. And so you have this massive 100,000 person city formed like overnight.
Welcome in here on Zion Media, and we have our regular Lancelot Weaver with us, and we got Drea the Bomb. We're going to be talking Book of Mormon geography. We're going to go through Lance's entire model. Not a little bit of this, not a little bit of that. We're going to get through all of it so you can succinctly and clearly understand an overview of his continental model, because we're going to Mexico. That's right, we're going to Mexico. And I've had a lot of people ask, hey, when are you going to Mexico again? We're going to let you know, but it might be sometime late winter, early spring that we go back out. So stay tuned for dates and times. We'd love to have you come on. We'll start announcing it again when we are going again to go over everything and see everything that Lance is talking about. So with that, Lance, welcome to Zion Media. Let's jump into your model. Let's get through it.
All right. Yeah, we'll see if my glitchy camera here behaves long enough for me to get through this. All right, this is going to be the first time, I think, hopefully, the first time ever that we get through like basically the entire overview, right? And this is really difficult for me because I get off on tangents so easily. Like any question, I get off on a tangent, and then the next thing you know, we're out of time. This time, I'm just going to fly through things. I'm just going to go through it. We're going to like spend like 30 seconds on every slide. I've got a bunch of slides here, and we're just going to try and get through the entire model, right? So hold on to your shirts, guys. I mean, this is going to be a first for me, right? And you're just going to have to bear with my glitchiness. But let's do this. Let's do this. I'm going to go through the entire model, right? We're going to talk about all the city correlations, all the strengths, all the weaknesses. Hopefully this should be kind of exciting. For people who are coming on the Mexico tour, you know, this should be a good overview for you. People who want to come next year, you know, should be awesome. And like I said, we'll start doing some other tours too, in the Southwest and some of the other regions, right? Okay, so for those who don't know, right, we've done like probably 10 different videos. So I'm going to be doing overviews on things that we've done entire videos on. So I'm going to just reference a lot of those videos that we've done and different articles and stuff on my website. So go to those videos to get more information, because we're just doing an overview this time. Okay. So this is the Book of Mormon Geography Highland Continental Model, right? So the Weaver model is a model that is kind of a hybrid model. Just a quick review. If you haven't gone to my Book of Mormon Archaeology Explorer, right? Do it, right? This model, you couldn't do it without using this tool, right? And I'll just show people, like, you can go right here on my website and see this interactive site, zoom into every different archaeological site, click on it, find information. If I hadn't have made this, there's no way that I could have figured out, you know, all of these cities, you know, and people who want to check it out for themselves, just go get on my website, which of course is GatheredIn.One, right? You can go to this archaeology tab, and all of this stuff I'm going to be referencing is right here. You know, I've got dozens and dozens of articles, hundreds of pages, maps, everything that you need to really get into this model. And I've already had a couple people who have like helped so much because they kind of see the truth of it, feel the truth of it, and they've dove in and done their entire, like Ryan Hinckley. He's got 2 awesome videos on his websites on the Palace of Mosiah, right? Or a Palace of King Noah, where we've actually found like the remains of Abinadi. Most likely. It's pretty wild. Okay, so let's go back here. This is the overview of the model right here as far as a map. I'll full screen it. Right, so this is a hybrid model that combines both the land northward, combines the Heartland model that's popular in the church right now, and the Mesoamerica models. My land southward is Mesoamerica. My land northward is the land northward, or is the Heartland. Sorry, Eastern United States. Okay, so just first of all, what is it that really sets this model apart, and what is it that makes me think that it by far is the best model? Right, there's a couple points here that I'm going to hit that are really important. Right, so this is the only model to match the internal model where others fail. Right, and I have an article of 50 pages of internal model things. There's no other model that really matches the internal model. I'll go over why. It's the only model to match all of Joe Smith's quotes. Right, Joe Smith has quotes, and they cover all the way from Mesoamerica to North America, including a South American landing. No other model incorporates all of those quotes. Mine's the only model. Right, and I'll go over the details on why. This is the only model that really ties in things like Ixtlilxochitl's histories, right? And people haven't even heard of him. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who he is, about some of these early Spanish chronologers, right? Who are half Aztec and half Spanish. And they took the ancient histories and kind of told about it, told amazing things. My model matches with what he says about where these things happen and the things that correlate a lot with what the Book of Mormon does. No other model really does that. No other model really even comes close. And like I said, most people haven't heard of that, so you'll find that interesting. It's the only model that really matches expert opinion, right, on the population and scope of what the Book of Mormon requires. And I'll actually show some videos that have like Mesoamerican experts saying like, well, if it's in the Highland, maybe it's possible, but no other place really matches it. So wait for that. We'll cover it. It's the only model that really harmonizes the existing conflicting models like the Heartland and the Mesoamerican model, right? And it's the only model that really has as much archaeological evidence as mine has. I mean, it really kills the rest of them, and I'll give some proof to that, right? And if you disagree, you can write down in the comments, but listen to the whole model first, and get a feel for what it is before you form an opinion and comment on it. Okay, so again, here's the model overview, right? We've got the land northward in North America. We've got the land southward in Mesoamerica. We've got the land of Zarahemla being the Mexican highland. We've got the Olmecs, being part of the Jared. Jaredites cover the entire continent, all the way from the Olmec lands to the Adana lands in the north. So really quick, like I said, the only model to harmonize the strengths of the 2 dominant models. Let's just really quick go over and talk about how this happens, right? In the south, we've got the Mayan models. They are split mostly between 2 predominant models, the Ixumacinta as the River Sidon, the Grijalva as the River Sidon. That's the Sorensen model. And then you've got the Heartland group, right? Wayne May and Rod and all their great work that they've done in North America. So my model harmonizes both of those regions, including, if you've heard of the Baja model, where we've got, who is that? David Rosenthal, who kind of had this spiritual experience. I really think that this actually matches really well. Well, mine covers that as well, right? And even the South American landing. So we'll talk a little bit more about the issues with those models and how this one fits them in a second. One thing I want to point people to really quick is, so the place you have to start, right, with any Book of Mormon model is the internal model, right? And these models have lots of really great points, but if you don't fit the internal model, like what are you doing? Why are you even trying to come up with a Book of Mormon geography if you don't fit the internal model? The internal model requires a couple of really important things, right? And let me just go over what these are, right? There's lots of people who have created internal models, and they are fairly consistent. And the reason why they're fairly consistent is because the text is very specific on things that are needed for the internal model. And if you're not going to match these things, like, what are you doing trying to make? You might as well put the thing on Mars. You might as well just invent Narnia. It's like it needs to match the internal model, or else why even try to make a consistent external geography to the Book of Mormon?
Today's episode is brought to you by FamiliesGettingHelp.com. Men, Porn is the plague of our generation, but I promise you there's a way out. Aaron Del Toro's team uses faith-aligned hypnotherapy and daily protocols to help you rewire and reclaim your power. Go to familiesgettinghelp.com, book an assessment with my man Mark, and then watch our full interview with Aaron Del Toro on Zion Media to see how it works. Hey, today's episode is brought to you by familiesgettinghelp.com. Guys, there's so many people that I meet, especially men, that are struggling with pornography. It is affecting your ability to love. It's affecting your relationships, and it's affecting your relationship with Christ. I prayed sincerely to be introduced to a group that could help people, and they have a 95% success rate. Reach out to familiesgettinghelp.com, schedule a private assessment with Mark. He's going to walk you through how the program works. They're using hypnotherapy and other modalities that can help you overcome your pornography addiction. The program takes about 6 to 7 weeks. So make sure and go to familiesgettinghelp.com, schedule a time with Mark. He'll do an assessment for you and get help today.
The things that are most important in this model that, let me really quick find my, look, I'm just going to go really quick to this. This is a starting point for people who want to see the internal model right here. Okay, so this article goes through every single city and all of the references, and it just starts with the most basic, most important things that every internal model, they all share, right? Anyone who's done an internal model, they share these important aspects, and it's what an external geography has to match, and it's what the existing ones kind of fail on. And what that is, right here at the very beginning, you have to have an EC and a West Sea, right? So Alma 22 just lays out the entire framework, talks about how that the land of Nephi, borders from the sea on the east and on the west. It talks about a narrow strip of wilderness that runs from the sea east even to the sea west. So if you don't have an EC and a West Sea, that the land of Nephi run between those, if you don't have an EC and a West Sea to have a narrow strip of wilderness between those, even with Zarahemla, right? It talks about the land of Bountiful, even from the east unto the West Sea. It talks about a sea right here, also on the west of the land of Bountiful and the borders by the seashore. Like what? There's a seashore west of Zarahemla. If your model doesn't have a seashore west of Zarahemla, what are you doing, right? Continuing on here, it talks more and more about this West Sea, how important it is to have a West Sea and an East Sea, and a narrow strip of wilderness between the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla. And you can see every single one of these internal models that have been made from people from BYU, various members, they all share those exact same characteristics because the text is very specific, right? East Sea, West Sea. You can see there's just a lot of agreement between these models, including my model that I made, right here in 9th grade, right? I made this in 9th grade. And it's like, I didn't even use the other models. Why does it look like the other models? Because the book is consistent on what it requires. But the problem is that these models, and I'm just going to show right here, have major issues, right? So for instance, let's look at the Heartland model here. Where's the West Sea? There's no West Sea, right? Their land of Zarahemla is up here, across from Nauvoo. There's no West Sea there.
That's the big thing for me, Lance, that I'm just like, that's the one, I like a ton of stuff they're doing, but that's one of the things for me that I'm like, they have a hard time answering that question.
Well, and that's just one of actually dozens of inconsistencies with the model. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail in all of them, but I'm just going to say, like, if you're trying to make the Mississippi River both the River Sidon and a sea, it's like, what? How inconsistent is that? You're going to try and say that Mormon, like he called it sometimes a sea and sometimes a river? Like, I don't know, and it, not only that, it doesn't work because the West Sea is west of Zarahemla. It's clear on that. It's west of the land of Nephi, right? And definitely west of Zarahemla. Their Zarahemla, right, is on the west side of their River Sidon, which is the Mississippi. But so then that it can't be the West Sea. And not only that, it's like people try and reinvent the entire geography by saying, well, maybe the sea used to come up there before the time of Christ. It's like, well, if you're going to start altering the geography of the world, like once again, it's like in Narnia. Like, you might as well just invent it in the middle of say it's a sunken land and you can make it shape however you are. And it was out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or something. The thing is that there's tons of archaeological sites all the way up and down the Mississippi River that carbon date to before the time of Christ. So if you're going to try to say that the time of Christ changed the shorelines, well, what do you do about all these archaeological sites that would have been below the sea? And yet here they are. We have evidence of ones that date to like 2000 BC, right? That Watson Break Mounds, Poverty Point culture. There's so many sites along that all date to before the time of Christ. You can't put a sea there. And you try and point to the Cretaceous Seaway, this geologic stuff where it has layers that
it seems like a lot of mental gymnastics.
Yeah, it's just a stretch. It's a huge stretch. And like I say, if that was the only problem, maybe you'd allow some of those mental gymnastics, but you've got tons more problems, right? And I'm just going to go for the Sorensen model really quick. You got the exact same problem because our East Sea and our West Sea are really north-south. It's like our sea is to the south. And so then they come up with this idea where the directions are transferred 90 degrees because of a translation caveat that they bring up among Egyptian geographers, but it's like, that doesn't work either because we have directions in the early part of the Book of Mormon that say that they traveled southeast along the Red Sea, and then they traveled directly east to Bountiful to build their ship. It's like those directions are spot on. If their directional system was somehow flipped 90 degrees, those directions would be wrong. It wouldn't say they went south along the Red Sea. It would say they went east along the Red Sea or something. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. So once again, it's just like when you have the wrong model, then your brain comes up with all sorts of crazy things like, well, maybe, how can I make it fit into my model? And that's all well and good if it's the only option. But if you find an option that it's like, well, this works without having to make all of those crazy ideas like rearranging the geography. The South American models often do that. They say the entire Amazon was underwater before the time of Christ. But you've got the same problem. There's all these sites that radiocarbon date to before the time of Christ in that jungle. So then how does that work? It doesn't. Why not just stick with something that works? And if you want to see these issues, like I say, I have an article called Comparing Book of Mormon Geography Models. And I go over every single one of these issues, one by one. This is probably 50 pages of just one by one. I talk about like what it would even look like if the sea came up the Mississippi River, to the extent that they say why that doesn't work. I talk about the story of Haggath. I talk about, typonomic transfers. I talk about every single kind of issue the idea that the Heartlanders have that the Black Swamp used to be like this big extension to one of the lakes. So then it makes their narrow neck work. It's like, well, that doesn't work because we can find maps that were made in the 1600s, the 1700s, the early 1800s, all before the Black Swamp was drained. And guess what? Lake Erie doesn't look any different. Why? Because the map makers knew that was not a lake. It was a swamp, right? It was just a swampy area, but it was obviously land. And so if you're going to say, well, the Book of Mormon people thought it was a lake, but once again, why not just go with a model that you don't have to change the geography all over the place in order to make it fit with the internal geography, which, like I mentioned before, anyway, just look at, is very consistent. The internal geography, which one is it right here, is very consistent, and it needs to fit those things. So how does my model fit those things? Let's just look really quick right here, and I will make it big so you can see. Right, and so this is almost kind of identical to the BYU internal geography, right? That was made. It's that green one that I just showed, which is really well done, right? I think they have a couple little issues in their internal model, but for the most part, I think it's really well done. The things that I disagree with is they have their River Sidon. We know that it flows from Monte in the south, which is in the narrow strip of wilderness between the Sea of Nephi and the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla. We know it flows north for somewhere there, but they have it exiting up this direction. I say, well, that doesn't make sense for a couple of reasons. First of all, because we have the armies of the Amalekites moving up the east coast, and it never mentions them crossing the River Sidon, and it probably would. And in the final retweet, we have battles that are heading over to this northwest coast, and they never cross the River Sidon either. So that only leaves us with one direction, and that's having it, after flowing northward, exiting over to the west. And in Alma 22, it actually says that, right? Alma 22, it mentions how that the narrow strip of wilderness covers from the East Sea to the West Sea. And then it says, and the River Sidon going from east to west, which I think is actually saying that the river went from east to west, just like it says in the script, in the text there. So anyway, you can go to my internal, I have all those things. They're all just so easily laid out. But you can see, here's my land of Bountiful, right? I've got my land of Zarahemla here. got my land of Nephi to the south. I've got my riverside in between them with a major section that flows north past the land of Monte, which is required by the internal model. And then I have it leaving to the west, like I think it says in Allen 22. And if you go to my things, I have so many notes here. I have the East Sea, I have the West Sea. I have my land of many waters, being the place in the U.S. that has the most many waters, great bodies of water is what it even says. Where in North America are there lots of great bodies of water? North America, right? The Great Lakes. That's where the great waters, where there are many waters. They call them Mississippi, the eastern U.S. That's where there's many waters. So that is my land northward, my land of many waters. I have Cumorah being Cumorah. There's only one Cumorah, and it's in New York. The only thing that is slightly different in my model, and you can see I've kind of modified it here, is the narrow neck, right? Because most people say that the narrow passes, which there are 7 mentions to either narrow passes or narrow necks. Most people think that the narrow passes are kind of synonymous with the narrow neck. I say, no, they're actually different than the narrow neck, right? And every one of the other models has kind of weird things with the narrow neck too, because the narrow neck is kind of confusing. But I have an entire article on the narrow neck. I have every single article or every single of those verses that you can kind of go through and read. And I show how, well, it's like, this actually fits. It actually fits that the narrow passes are subsets of the narrow neck. Nothing actually happens on the narrow neck in the Book of Mormon. It's always by the narrow neck, right? So that's why I think some of the references to the narrow neck are actually to Baja. They are saying that this is the delineator between the land northward and land southward. They went up there, you hit this huge rain shadow. That's where it switches from bountiful to desolation because the rain shower hits. If you've ever gone up West Mexico, you know what I'm talking about. That's where most of their arable farmland is their most bountiful production area. And then it just becomes completely desolate. After you hit Mazatlan, get closer to Culiacan, just turns completely desolate. And you've got the narrow neck there to the left, and you've got these narrow passes, right? And the narrow passes are kind of these just narrow coastal plains that are only like 10 to 20 miles wide that you can easily make an army fortification on so that nobody else can come up because you can't go up through the interior of Mexico, right? Even today it's hard, but in the old days, there was no transportation up through the central Mexico. It's an impassable desert. Okay, so let's keep going past there. My other big, it's the only model to really match Joseph Smith's major regions, right? Where he said the Book of Mormon happened. So once again, I'm like, well, why don't we just believe Joseph Smith? He does this exact same thing that I do. My model just follows Joseph Smith's model, where he says they landed in South America, 30 degrees south, right? And people who say arguments that it's like, well, he said 30 degrees south. I think he meant 30 degrees north in Florida. It's like, well, you read the quotes. I've got an article. I've got every single quote right here. Go read the quotes. They're all here. And you can see why that logic between them landing 30 degrees south being Florida does not work. Read the quotes. There's 3 of them. He said he went down by the Red Sea to the Great Southern Ocean, crossed over this land and landed a little south of the Isthmus of Darien. Look it up. That's Panama. He landed a little south of the Isthmus of Darien, right? And then they say, well, he meant Florida. Well, how do you mistake that? He says the same thing right here. They traveled nearly south direction until they came to the 19th degree of north latitude, then nearly east to the Sea of Arabia, then sailed in a southeast direction and landed on the continent of South America in Chile, 30 degrees south latitude. And yet you got Wayne May saying, well, he meant Florida. He meant 30 degrees north. It's like, well, what part of the continent of South America don't you understand in that quote? You're just making things up at this point because you're discarding every single part of the quote, except for the part that you want to hear, which is the word 30 degrees, and you're changing it from south to north so that it can be Florida and fit your idea. When it's like, no, you just destroyed the quote. And
yes, it's just, I say this all the time, Lance. I'm just like, read the words. What do the words say?
Yeah.
Go find the quote. Lance has done it. I mean, I've looked at a lot of these models. There's nothing that Lance is saying that he can't point to a scripture, a quote by Joseph Smith that doesn't align. So he's taking what they've said, and that's why he's how he's developed this model.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a third quote that mentions Chile specifically. And the Chile makes sense, right? Because not only do you have right there in Peru and Chile, like southern Peru has Caracol, this old archaeological ruin that dates to the same date as the Great Pyramids and to Stonehenge, right? Which it's talking my model. I think that the global trade networks were established at the time the Great Pyramids were built, right? Way back at the time of Joseph or earlier. And why did they land in Chile? Because when you catch those roaring 30s, those roaring 40s, even today, if you try and circumnavigate the world, they all do it down in those roaring 40s in the southern hemisphere. Why? Because that's where the winds, they just whip you super fast. So it makes sense that Nephi would have been led down to that southern corridor where all the racers race their sailboats so they can get across there fast, fast, fast. And it spits you up right up there in Chile or Peru, right? That's where the winds go. And so then he'd follow the coast all the way up to North America. You can see right here. So Joe Smith says he lands south of the Isthmus of Darien or in Chile. We've got two quotes. They say that the land of Zarahemla was, one quote's in Tula, Mexico. The other quote's in Quirigua, or Copan and Tonina, those places that Stephen's Incidents of Travels, like he's saying it's down in that area, even though that those specific sites didn't exist at the time Zarahemla did. You know, they're all later, things that are built later in Mayan times, like 800 AD. He's got that region, like Zarahemla and all that is down there in Central America. He's got Bountiful in Central America. He's got Desolation. Everyone ignores his Desolation quotes, right? We've got two different people, Levi and Mosiah Hancock, talking about how that Desolation was in the Southwest, right? It's like, that's why the Saints came to Utah. So they could be right there by where Desolation is, where the plates were actually hidden, where the hills were. Tons of evidence about that. You know, that was the last place where the Nephites lost their power, Mosiah Hancock says, before they headed east to the Heartland, right? Which was the land northward of the Nephites, and which was the first inheritance of the Mulekites, where the Mulekites lived, where there's all sorts of Israelites dating all the way back to, like I said, Joseph in Egypt, right? So anyway, read through the quotes. There's so many. There's even a map, you know, Moroni's map. If you've seen that, there's two different copies of Moroni's map in the church history offices where he talks about how the saints would retrace the horseshoe. He'd retrace the route that Moroni made when he came up with the Nephites, and he dedicated the temples. He dedicated the St. George Temple and the Monte Temple. We've got Brewer's Cave. We've got all this evidence. We've got the Mintanah archives that give this exact same thing that Joe Smith did, right? That I'm trying to push, this whole North American model, that it happened all over from Mexico to North America. And if you haven't read the Mintanah archives, do it. It's pretty awesome. Their story of Haggith and how they come up into the Southwest and found Chaco Canyon and all these early archaeological sites, and how an offshoot comes over into San Pete County. And that's why the Monte Temple there is there, because we had Nephites in San Pete County. I mean, it's just really cool. It's so much information. I get it. But look into it. You know, it's just really cool. So, like I say, why not just believe Joe Smith's model? You know, why not just believe him? Why, you know, hug to one little section and forget everything else? The South American people just believe in the South American quote and nothing else. The Mesoamerican people believe in the Times and Seasons articles, and they find ways to dismiss the plains of the Nephites and the, you know, the general, who is it that they found in the middle of the East? They found the mounds, you know. So there's lots of cool self, exactly. That's something. So it's like they dismiss self and come up with kind of crazy ways to just explain it away. They have the two Cumorah way to explain it away. But then the Heartland people do the same thing. They have some really interesting ways of explaining away all of the, you know, Mesoamerican quotes. And it makes a lot of sense in their mind, you know, and people can judge for themselves because they've got their own good arguments. But I say, why not just believe all the quotes? Okay. So let's keep going here. We already gone over Moroni's map. Anyway, how my model, I'll keep pushing this again and again, how my model kind of matches this. It's like, so back to some of the ideas. Both the Meso and the Heartland people have real problems, right? Because Zarahemla in the Book of Mormon is a big city, right? It talks about them fielding armies of 10 to 20,000 people, even before the time of Christ. If you have an army of 20,000 people, then you got to have a city of a population of like 100,000 people, right? It talks about the Gadiantans coming down after they've gathered, and it says they go out by their 10s and their 20s and they're fighting battles, right? And they're hewing down tens of thousands of the Gadiant robbers. Like, this is a big city. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you have an ancient city with over 20,000 people and definitely over 50,000 people, it leaves its mark. Like we were talking about, these are some of the biggest cities in all of North America. Cahokia is like one of the largest archaeological sites in North America. And it had a peak of population of 20,000 people, right? So we're talking, and its mounds are huge. Like, these mounds are massive. Like, if you've ever seen Monk's mounds or all the different mounds that are in Cahokia, and it dates to like, you know, 800 to 1000 AD. But it had a population of like 20,000 people. So then if we're going to try and make Zarahemla be someplace, you know, across from Nauvoo where there's like zero evidence, that's pretty problematic. If we're going to try and make Zarahemla Santa Rosa, which is a Sorensen model, right, down there in Chiapas, we've got a real problem, because Santa Rosa, you know, did not have 20,000 people before the time of Christ, right? It might have had 5,000 people before the time of Christ. So like, you need a big city. Like, these are cities that are comparable to the populations of Jerusalem, right? Ancient Jerusalem of the time. If you've got a city of 100,000 people fielding armies of 20,000 people, and so if you're going to try and make your correlation into some like tiny archaeological site, you've got like a major problem. And that is exactly in this slate right here what Michael Coe brings up. Like Michael Coe, he's like the foremost expert in Mesoamerican archaeology, right? He passed away a little while ago. He's a Yale professor, and he knew a lot about the Book of Mormon because a lot of different people had come up to him and been like, what do you think about the Book of Mormon? So he looked into it. He'd read parts of it. Like he understood what he was talking about. He saw that the armies they were fielding, and he hears from these people that it's Mayans, and he's like, well, that doesn't really make sense because the Mayans, during the time the Book of Mormon is having these huge armies, which is like 100 BC to about the time of Christ, there were no cities big enough for that. This is in his Mormon Stories interview. And he says one thing in there that is really pretty profound, right? So he says, if Joseph Smith was talking about the Valley of Mexico as it was between 200 BC and 400 AD, then there might be something in it, right? But he says, with the Mayan lands, there's just not enough population during that time period to have cities that are like these old world style cities the Book of Mormon talks about, right? But he says that if he was talking about the Mayan highland, that's possible. Why? Because the Mayan highland is where all the population was. If you're talking about that period of 200 BC to the time of Christ, the population is in the highland, right? And one of Joseph Smith's quotes has like Zarahemla equated with the Valley of Mexico, Mexican highland. My model has Zarahemla being the Morelos Valley up into the Mexican highland. And Ixtli Xochitl, who we're about to go over here in a second, he talks about the main holy city being the Mexican highland, Cholula, Teotihuacan, right? The Valley of Morelos. Okay, so most people haven't even heard of Ixtli Xochitl. This is really amazing, right? Ixtli Xochitl goes over, he's got these. So his quotes sound more like the Book of Mormon than any other historian or chronologer out there, right? He's got so many things that correlate perfectly, honestly, with what the Book of Mormon says. And it's crazy that most people haven't even heard of him. And the reason why is because his model doesn't fit the Heartland model. His model doesn't fit the Grijalva Sumacinta model. And so they mostly kind of dismiss him, right? But just listen to the things he says, right? And when I do this, so go to my article. I have an article called Ixtli Xochitl and Evidence of the Book of Mormon. I have every one of these quotes that I'm going to go over in this. And I have actual quotes and an actual copy of his book, right? But so we just listen to this. This is the same things in the slide here. So they both tell of a prophet historian who wrote their scriptures, right? Both the Book of Mormon and Ixtli Xochitl. They both tell a story of a war of annihilation. Will two kingdoms fight to the death with men, women, and children, and one is annihilated, right? Just like the Book of Mormon. They both speak of a creation from a primordial male and female couple, right? He talks about Adam and Eve. They both speak of a flood which destroyed the world by water. They both speak of the first king in civilization coming from a great tower at the time of the confusion of tongues, right? The brother of Jared, compared to what he talks about of the Chichimecs, basically. He says they both speak of a white god who was born of a virgin who ascended into heaven after teaching the people, right? He calls him Quetzalcoatl. And so the Ixtli Xochitl, just so people who aren't familiar with him, right? He is like the grandson of the King Montezuma, right? So he's like one generation after the conquest of the Aztecs by Cortez. One of the Spanish dons takes one of the daughters of the king, of the emperor, right? And they have a child and they raise him. And so that he knows Nahuatl, right? So he speaks the native language, but he also speaks Spanish. So he's like learned in the learnings of the Jews and of the natives, right? And he even says in the beginning of his thing, he's like, I go out and I talk to all the elders and I get their stories and I understand completely their language and their myths and everything. And so I'm telling you what I believe they are saying through a Christianized eye, because he's able to see both cultures, right? According to him, he can totally understand the culture of his mother, because he's only one generation removed from the conquest. He's still living in it. And he completely understands now the new Christian culture because he's been raised in Christian schools and learned Spanish. And so this is his interpretation, right? And so there's people like Brant Gardner, different scholars, they'll look at this and be like, definitely a lot of the anti-Christian Spanish scholars of these days, they look at Ixtli Xochitl and they say, we don't believe a word he says. He's just completely Christianizing all these ancient tales, and we don't believe anything he says. But I'm saying, no, but that's exactly what the Book of Mormon is too. Book of Mormon is a group of Jews who are also Christianizing like all of the history of the ancients, right? And giving us to it in a version that is kind of like King James English, King James history, correlating it with the Bible. And our faith is that their way of telling the histories is actually more true than the convoluted myths of the natives. In the same way that we would look at like Prometheus or some Greek myth that kind of sounds like Christ, and we say like, you know what, that is a convoluted Gentile myth that's actually pointing to real truths that were taught all the way back at the time of Abraham and Moses and by all these prophets. They took the truth and they convoluted it and built this entire system of myths around it. And now it's just like garbled blah if you read it through the Greeks. But if you read it through the Hebrews, it's getting a true history. So then my argument is Ixtlilxochitl, he is getting to the true histories in these myths, and people like Brant Gardner or other, scholars who dismiss all that, they instead are believing the Greeks. They're believing the garbled mythology and saying, no, that's actually the truth. Okay. But I mean, you should really check out some of the most impressive ones, right? He talks about how Christ came. He talks about a great destruction happening on the first month and the 34th year after the death of Christ. I mean, listen to this quote. This is from Fernando Ixtlilxochitl's history, right? He says, it had been 166 years since they had adjusted their calendar with the equinox and 270 years since the first inhabitants had been destroyed when the sun and the moon eclipsed, right? First inhabitants, he's talking about the first people because he talks about 3 different groups that come to America, just like the Book of Mormon does. So after the first ones had been destroyed, like the Jaredites, right? He says, when the sun and the moon eclipsed and the earth quaked and the rocks were broken into pieces and many other signs that had been given came to pass, although man was not destroyed. This was in the year C.E. Kali, which adjusted to our calendar happened at the same time Christ our Lord was crucified. And they say that this destruction occurred in the first few days of the year.
Wow.
Right? Like, look at that. He's saying that the rocks were broken into pieces. Like literally, these are like almost word for word quotes out of the Book of Mormon. Honestly, if there is a non-Mormon who wants to like come up with some kind of naturalistic view because they just can't believe in prophets and they want to try and like dismiss the Book of Mormon, say he copied it from Ixtlilxochitl. That's the most reasonable way to actually like come up with an explanation of the Book of Mormon, right? You'd have to explain a ton of things that Joseph Smith hits spot on that aren't in Ixtlilxochitl, which is why I don't subscribe to that. But honestly, this whole thing of View of the Hebrews and all these other dumb books, the Book of Mormon just doesn't even sound a thing like. Blah. But Ixtlilxochitl, like his stories in here are so much like the Book of Mormon, right? They both record the destruction of the first civilization that predates the coming of Christ, who lived in the northern lands and the land northward. They both speak of a nation whose principal area meant land of abundance or bountiful. They both mention migrations to and from the far northern land. They both give stories of escaping bondage by intoxicating their captors in conjunction. They mention only one river, right? He calls it a Toyak, which I think is the River Sidon, which flows between the two principal cities, right? His main holy city is almost always Cholula, which is my Zarahemla, right? So this is crazy stuff. But like I say, go ahead, read my articles. You can see all of my information here and you can see how impressive it is. And then you can start picking out of Diego Duran and the other historians, aside from Ixtlilxochitl, and find all the correlations between their historias, right? Their histories of the early natives and how they match with the coming of Christ, right? To the New World. Really cool stuff. Okay, so we're going to skip over that. I'm going to make these big again. But like I say, he talks about 3 different landings. I kind of have those mapped out on my site. He talks about a group of people. He talks about 3 different migrations going all the way from the Valley of Mexico all the way up to North America. I try and map those out. I give synopsis. I have so many diagrams that like summarizes hundreds of pages of writings that I've read from these guys. His like making his travels match with what I do ends up bringing in a bunch of linguistic evidence because it travels this exact path where we find the Uto-Aztecan language being predominant. And Brian Stubbs, found Uto-Aztecan, has all these Hebrew roots. It's really the only language in the New World that has a scholarly article really showing valid correlations between Hebrew and their language, right? The Uto-Aztecan. Really kind of cool stuff. I'm going to skip over some of this stuff. So then as we get closer, just so you know, this is like a close-up of the southern part of my model, right? Because the heartland of my model between the land of Zarahemla and the land of Nephi are only about 240 miles apart. So even though the final battle in the land northward, which the Book of Mormon says were many days' journey. In fact, it talks about it being an exceedingly long distance. It's the only time in the Book of Mormon where it says someone traveled an exceedingly long distance. That's what they talk about with the land northward, as opposed to going between Zarahemla and Nephi, which only takes like 20 days, right? So like a 180 to 250 mile journey if we average like 10 to 20 miles a day. Okay, so really quick, you can just see here, we've got our land of Nephi in the Valley of Oaxaca. We've got our land of Zarahemla, which is the Morelos Basin. And then as the Lamanites continue to encroach on people, the people were pushed up into the highland more and more, right? So even though they start down the Morelos Basin, they end up in Cholula. And then when Laconius comes and gathers everybody on the border of Zarahemla and the land of Zarahemla and land of Bountiful, he builds Teotihuacan, which we'll talk about in a second. So I've got slides here that have every single travel. So if you want to see all the different travels, the only other person I've ever seen do this is Sorensen. You know, he's the only one who's done this kind of level of comprehensive study and matching that I have. But I've got every single journey, you know, whether it be the people of Mosiah, the Amalekite army, the Albán Amalekites mission, the Nephite army getting prisoners that sack Ammonihah, Amalekiah's army attack, the Amalekites on the East Coast, Helaman's 2,000 Stripling warriors, the Limhite expedition, right? I give two possibilities for where they went to go find the Jaredite plates, Nephi's escape, the final Nephite flight to the land northward. So you can see all of the journeys on this one map here, right? And if you want to find this, this is on my overview site of my webpage. And then here again is kind of just an overview showing again all of my land of many waters, Cumorah, Desolation, land of Zarahemla, land of Nephi. And I've got the Mayans being like the kind of the further land of the Lamanites. The Lamanites are centered though in the Valley of Oaxaca. Okay, and then my Jaredites, people can pause these if they want when they're watching the video. I'm not going to go over them very much, but I've got a ton of text here. If you want to pause it and just kind of go over my things, me talking about Omer's flight and how Omer goes over by Zarahemla and how he flies many days, which once again, I say that's like 2,500 miles. He is flying very far. I give lots of really interesting things for that. Okay, I'm going to start going through actual correlations here, and I'm only going to spend 15 minutes on this. Okay, so you can watch some of my other videos. I talk about in other videos how I think that the Jaredite record has a lacuna, that there's missing time in there. I allow space if you want to say that radiocarbon dates are completely wrong. Fine. But I think more likely there's a lacuna and that the first inhabitants of America match with the Jaredites, because that's what the Jaredite record insists, right? The Jaredite record is pretty clear that there weren't people here when they got here. It's possible not, but it seems to really suggest that they're the first people that come here. They're dealing with elephants, Kurlans, and Kumans, which is like, why aren't those words translated? Probably because they are extinct, right? And it says that they're especially useful for the food of man. And it says there's a great dearth and all the animals start migrating with their flights to the land, with their flocks to the land southward, and they chase after them until they eat them all, right? It says that. Well, it's like scientists have found that with the end of the Younger Dryas. That's what happened with the major extinction of all the megafauna at the end of the Younger Dryas. But that is radiocarbon dated at the end of the Ice Age, which is 10,000 BC, whereas the Book of Mormon gives no date. There's no date, right? So it's like, maybe you can say that the last Ice Age is completely radiocarbon dated wrong. I favor that there's like a lacuna. There's missing time in the Book of Mormon. The Jaredite record actually starts with the end of the Ice Age, along with, anyway, we could go through old world evidence of where people are saying the same type of stuff, but I'm going to skip over that for now. We have tons of really interesting things as we move into like the 2000 BC period, because not only are the Olmecs showing lots of really interesting correlations to the Babylonians, in West Mexico, there are these shaft tombs, and they find unbelievable correlations between the Babylonians and these West Mexican tombs, right? I mean, look at some of these. Like you got Greek little, I don't know what you call it, figurines, basically, that match with those of Kalima, Greece. These are of Kalima. Some of these guys, even the way they look, is like so crazy how much they look like Spanish or early Phoenician traders. You've got actual records. Like this is a record from Babylon, where it says Ibusin, the god of this country, the mighty king, king of Ur. This is right, Ur in Sumeria and Babylon, the four world quarters. His red Mahula, a dog from Maharsa, brought by them as tribute, a replicate of it fashioned for his life he dedicated to him. Right, it talks about these red dogs, and those are crazy popular in the same shaft tomb tradition of West Mexico. You find these red dogs that match what it talks about in the Babylonian annals of this faraway place that they traded with, right? It's really pretty cool. But once again, if you're going to hold to just the Heartland or just the Mesoamerican models, it's like, these are all in West Mexico. They're in my land desolation. How do they even fit with those models? the city of Nephi, we've done a lot of shows, so I'm not going to talk about it, but there is no better match to the city of Nephi than Monte Albán, right? There's no better match. It's so amazing, right? I'm just going to read these and then I'm not going to say much more about them. You can see our other videos where we have so much information on it, right? But the site timelines match perfectly. Monte Albán is built right there, like 550 BC, right? Radiocarbon date, give or take 40 years. They're the only known two-room, east-facing, two-column Solomon-like temples in the ancient Americas. The one that they found through the ground penetrating radar is even more like Solomon's temple. It even has the cisterns underneath it. It even has the altar out in front of it. It has the two columns in front of it. Like, it's unreal. Even the name White Hill and the tomb pyramid layout matched amazingly with Jerusalem's white limestone motif. The way it's built up on a hill with the entire top just leveled off is just like Jerusalem. It's preceded by a priest cult with men's houses, which have two-room temples in it as well. The rock reliefs, to me, look a lot like genital mutilation, which are just like motifs that we see in Egypt, right? With the circumcision, like pretty kind of crazy, the circumcision motifs. The dry Mediterranean-like climate matches well with Israel, right? It's one of the few places you have to get up in the Mexican highland to be able to grow old world crops up out of the super humid environment of the Maya lands. The evidence for a social stratification and even polygamy, right? Like we have polygamy early in the Book of Mormon. In the archaeology, they find these sites where it's like, well, polygamy is suddenly appearing, but it's kind of weird. They're treating their wives really well, but they're introducing polygamy. It's like we see it in the archaeology. A later split in the valley between two dominant warring factions who divide between them. The later royal palace, El Palenque Palace, built around 200 BC, that matches with Limhi re-inhabiting the land, right? And there's a throne room, just like it talks about with King Noah. And now that they find a single cremated sacrifice in the throne room, just like Abinadi, right? Burned to death. They find him in the throne room. What are the chances of that? It's super crazy. And the dates match perfectly. And the location matches perfectly with what the Book of Mormon describes of like where the city of Nephi would be versus where the Limhites would have come back to. Not only that, it matches with the pottery there, matches with a outpost that they find right where I think my city of Helam should be, right? Where they fled. But anyway, I'll talk about this in other videos. Then even the alignments are pretty cool. It's alignment with Capella and how that matches with ancient Egyptian motifs, and also how it's aligned directly with the modern LDS temple. Like the LDS temple is built right there. Like if you stand on the altar and look right east, the way the temple and altar are facing, it points right to the modern temple. So what are the chances of that? Maybe that's coincidence, but that's crazy. It seems like inspiration to me. They're like, out of all the places we could build a modern temple, we're gonna build it right facing the ancient temple within 2 miles of Nephi's temple. Anyway, it's super cool. I'll just show some pictures here, right? Monte Albán up on a top hill. This is where our tours go. It's really crazy. These east-facing temples. This astronomy tower that faces Capella, which matches well with Pentecost. I'll talk about that at some other time. The astronomical alignments, which are pretty cool. There's like 4 different temples in here that are 2-room, 2-column temples. We've got the altars fit really well, right? The altars are not like raised altars. They're not on ramps, not on anything. So they go along with what people say, how that the altars didn't have steps. The warring factions, the no man's land between these 2 warring factions, the Nephites and Lamanites match. As I say here, like you can see these Egyptian motifs that show circumcision. And I think you have similar things that are actually showing circumcision and seed in the motifs in Monte Albán, right? This is Monte Albán, this is Egyptian, this is Egyptian, this is Monte Albán. There's really cool correlations between Brewer's Cave. Brewer's Cave is totally dismissed by archaeologists, but I encourage people to check it out. We've done some videos on that and how the drawings of the headdresses in Brewer's Cave match almost perfectly with some of the ones found in the tombs in Monte Albán, right? Heartland and Mesoamerica, really kind of crazy. Same with the glass goblets and the glass skulls that people talk about that existed in Brewer's Cave. We've got evidence in my land of Zarahemla of these huge stelas that were found, that the back of them has writing that matches with what we see on the characters document. Once again, this is totally dismissed by even most LDS scholars because it's not really in their lands of Nephi, but I think it's worth taking a look into. Like the front end of this Xochicalco stela is totally legit. Obviously not a forgery. That is a legit stela. The backside has Reformed Egyptian on it. Someone could make an argument that that was carved by some fraud. Who? I don't know. The Padilla plates that were kind of associated with this, They were probably fraudulent, but like this lock thing, I don't know how you carve that. Like those are not even carved into the rock. Like the rock is carved around them. They're outset, and yet they've got symbols that are found on the characters document, right? The Anthon transcript. And this is right there in my land of Zarahemla.
Hey, today's episode is brought to you by FamiliesGettingHelp.com. Guys, there's so many people that I meet, especially men, that are struggling with pornography. It is affecting your ability to love. It's affecting your relationships, and it's affecting your relationship with Christ. I prayed sincerely to be introduced to a group that could help people, and they have a 95% success rate. Reach out to FamiliesGettingHelp.com. Schedule a private assessment with Mark. He's going to walk you through how the program works. They're using hypnotherapy and other modalities that can help you overcome your pornography addiction. The program takes about 6 to 7 weeks. So make sure and go to FamiliesGettingHelp.com, schedule a time with Mark. He'll do an assessment for you and get help today.
This is the ground penetrating radar of the ancient temple. I'm not going to talk. There's a lot of alignments between it and my Zarahemla Capella. People can pause this and look at the text if they want to, but Capella has roots in Egyptian mythology, and not only that, with the person who I think correlates with Joseph in Egyptian mythology, right? Which is Ta and Imhotep. So we're just going to keep going a little bit more. Here's another view of my city of Nephi, right? Way up here on the plateau. And then my land is Zarahemla, the Morelos Basin, down here in the basin. But then the city of Laconis is way up here in the Mexican highland. And the main city of Zarahemla ends up pushing up to Cholula. Even though originally the land of Zarahemla is mostly in the Morelos Basin. And then this, of course, is the land of Monte here, the narrow strip of wilderness. And this would have been the path that most people took to get between the two. Chalcanzingo. Okay, I only have like 15 minutes here. I'm going to kind of go through this. Chalcanzingo is my land of Zarahemla. It's my original city of Zarahemla. So this is where the king Zarahemla lived, that the Mulekites first came to. And it's a perfect fit. It is so cool because it has these motifs that are so old world, right? If you can go there, it is a really cool place. They've got so many reliefs, murals like carved into the cliffs up above it. It dates to 800 BC. It was a main trading partner of La Venta. And if you've seen my video that shows all the motifs of La Venta and how well they match with the Assyrian motifs in the Assyrian temples, they're spot on, right? We'll point to them here in a second, but you can see here, like some of these murals, for instance, it talks about how that they brought this large stone to have Mosiah translate this stone, talking about Coriantumr, right? And this would have been in the early Mulekite city of the original city of Zarahemla that Mulekites lived in. Well, we have this large stone right outside of Chalcanzingo, and it has these 3 guys going up to this guy who's like dying. And there's even kind of an illustration where people think his spirit is coming out of his body, right? But check out these headdresses. Like you see those horns on him? Like the only other place I've seen those is in these Sumerian figurines. So these are like Babylonian and Assyrian figurines. They've got the same horns as this dude. And these interesting, like whether you're going to say they're ceremonial swords of some sort or ceremonial clubs, you've got the exact same thing in this old world Assyrian figurine, right? So you've got and you look at these guys, they've got beards, right? And this is a really common thing in both Oaxaca, my city of Nephi, and in Chalcanzingo. You've got tons of artwork with beards, probably more than any other part of Mesoamerica. All these bearded men and these really strong ties to old world art motifs, right? Like this very well could be the rock they were talking about that was brought and translated by King Mosiah, talking about Coriantumr, right? and these ancient Jarenites. So super cool. Utepec Palace, who I think that this is kind of right next to Chalcanzingo. So he kind of comes to the king of Zarahemla, and then he built his own little city, kind of not too far from it, which I think is Utepec Palace. Once again, this is down in the Valley of Morelos, before they then move their capital up to Cholula. So El Palenque Palace, you can go and watch Ryan Hinckley's videos on this. He's did such an excellent job. He's got 2 videos that are both over an hour showing the unreal similarities in both location, timing, like every aspect of the Limhites going back to the land of Nephi and building their city, and all the way to them building a tower where he could see the Lamanites coming to attack, right? King Noah, including the one remains of a cremated sacrifice within the palace, who very well could be Abinadi. Like everything fits perfectly with this site. It's really pretty impressive. So you can see, anyway, pause if you'd like to, and you can kind of read these things and see these schematics from the actual archaeological reports of this palace, right? And of the throne room and of the sacrifice they find in it and the location of them and the tower that they find up at the top of the hill that actually overlooks Monte Albán so that you can see the invading armies. I mean, I don't even know, like, think about this for real. Like if you were in the Heartland or you're in, Caminal Juyu or any of these places that are just so treed, how on earth would King Noah like see the armies of the Lamanites coming to attack them? How would he even see them through the trees? But for those who have come with us to Monte Albán, you know how it'd be easy, right? It's grassland. It's this high altitude, like very grassland, arid environment where it's not covered with jungle or trees. You'd absolutely be able to see an army coming. And not only that, from this location, you're way up on a hill, you could see them coming from like 10 miles away, definitely from 5 miles away. Like you'd know it. I don't know what other location you could really even see an army coming. There's tons of stuff in my model that match. Like, so Monte Albán is kind of the precursor to the talud tablero style architecture that then makes its way up into the Mexican highland, right? And becomes iconic of Teotihuacan. So it's almost like kind of a mother culture. Now that it's the same with writing, like the Zapotec writing style, a lot of people suggest that it might have actually been a precursor to the Epi Olmec, which gives rise to the Mayan writing. And definitely there's some synchronism that they're both kind of evolving at the same time. But it's some of the earliest writing in all the Americas is right there in Monte Albán. And I'm just going to show here that right by my Cholula, which is my land of Zarahemla, you've got this influx of motifs from Monte Albán. And especially that's seen in Xochicalco, right? So my main city of Zarahemla, like I say, it pushes up to Cholula, and Cholula has one of the biggest pyramids in the world, right? There's not a lot left of it. You can see this kind of part down here to the right. Can you guys see this right here? So that is the part that they've uncovered, but most of this part right here is still just like under dirt. It hasn't even really been excavated. And then they built a Spanish church on top of it, right? To kind of show that they have conquered it, which I think is kind of fitting, right? It's like Zarahemla, like Christ came to Zarahemla first, and it was one of the first churches that they kind of like built, the only church they built right on top of the pyramid to kind of show this true mixing of the ancient culture of what I say is Zarahemla and the modern return of Christ to Mexico, right? So Cholula and Zarahemla, they have lots of really cool correlations. If you want to pause this and read it, you can, but I'm just going to kind of move through these a little quicker. Here's some more pictures. We visited this last time we went up there. It was really pretty cool. Here's a little bit more. Like I said, Ixtlilxochitl talks a lot about Cholula. He's always talking about how it's kind of like the main place. It's on the east of one of the branches of the Balsas River, which I say is the River Sidon. So where it says that Zarahemla, is on the east side, on the west side of the River Sidon, because you have to cross over Sidon to go to Gideon. Gideon in my model is one of the sites in Puebla. So it matches pretty well. Another model here. So another really cool thing about my model is what happens with Moroni, right? I don't know of any other model that has a good match for what happens with Moroni, because Moroni in the text, right? So in the early parts of the Book of Mormon, and definitely in Alma 22, it really suggests that the border between the Lamanites and the Nephites was basically the River Sidon, right? Alma 22 kind of suggests that. And definitely we get that idea too, because in 3 different accounts, when the armies of the Lamanites come into the Nephite lands, they chase them out and they head them off at the River Sidon, usually kind of by Monte. And so I think that Sidon was kind of the original border, but definitely in Alma 50, right? In Alma 51, like we have this narrative, the entire chapter of where it says that Moroni built a new border, and he pushed, like after they'd been attacked, he pushed the Lamanites out of the wilderness that had kind of come up and around them, right? And so he pushes them all south, and he builds a line of fortified cities. And all the war chapters between Alma 50 and Alma 60 are accounts of them trying to like both build and retake these fortifications, these fortress cities that now divide the lands of the Lamanites and the land of the Nephites. Well, that works perfectly in my model, right? Because we have these Mixtex fortresses. And there's actually even an archaeological term that they came up with for this phenomenon that happened sometime around 100 BC, where they abandoned all their cities down in the valley and they built fortresses up on hilltops, just like the Book of Mormon says, right? So they abandoned their cities in the valley and they build like defensible cities up on top of the hills with walls on them. And they span all the way from the sea east to the sea west and then up the east coast, just like the Book of Mormon says, right? So if you you can see, here you can see like a string, and this line actually moves over time, and because there's these two warring polities, right? The Teotihuacan Empire of the Mexican highland and the Zapotec Empire of Oaxaca. They're constantly warring against each other, and so they're constantly rebuilding these fortress sites between the two cultures, which you don't get that anywhere else. Like this is such a perfect match to what the Book of Mormon says. And I mean, if you look at some of these archaeological sites, like look at this one down here, Cerro de las Minas, which is Manti. I mean, it's awesome. It is this absolute hilltop fortress with walls on every side, right? Defensible. And it's the same with all these. They build all these cities way up on the top of these hilltops that are fortresses. Like there's just no other model that has a string of cities. We might find a couple cities that have walls around them, or Teotihuacan had walls around it. Lots of ancient cities had walls around it. You can go into the Mayan lands and find a couple cities with walls around it, but find me a string of cities that are on hilltop fortifications, just like the Book of Mormon says, between two warring polities, right? This is the best match that there is for the Book of Mormon and what it says with Captain Moroni, right? Who builds his new line of cities across the continent, and then the wars that are fought between them. And then when it comes to the narrow corridors, we talked about a little bit earlier how I think the narrow passes are actually separate from the narrow neck, but and it says that the seas on the east and the west. I talked about how that there's kind of these spit bars, and that's what it's talking about. They head them off on these spit bars in these narrow passes, right? And so they've got sea to the east and the west of them, but they hit them as they come across the spit bar, which they probably had floating bridges on these things. This is probably the main kind of thoroughfare. They made trade networks between the land northward and the land southward. Here's another example of where they would have kind of come across. This is also swampy, that they would have come across the spit bars, and that's where they head out. They head Morianton's army. I'm not going to go into this, but my model talks about the destruction of the time of Christ being a comet impact. I think it's the only thing that could actually fit what the Book of Mormon says about a cometary impact. And so I'd invite people to kind of go on my site, look that up. You can just do a search for it, find the work that they did at Los Alamos Labs of what would happen if a major comet impacted the earth and how it actually caused a hurricane. It'd create a storm. Like not only do you have shockwaves go through the earth that would then destabilize magma chambers and make a bunch of volcanoes erupt at once, right? There's not many other things that make multiple volcanoes erupt at once. You'd have to have some kind of huge earthquake that destabilizes the magma chambers to have multiple volcanoes all erupting at once. But then how do you create a storm at the same time that's that has tornadoes and stuff? The Book of Mormon scope really suggests that it's not just a couple little things happening right around the volcano. Like it's like over the whole face of the land, right? I think it's because this cometary impact, and it creates an atmospheric shock wave that actually creates a massive storm that arises at the same time as the earthquake and is felt on the other side of the world when Christ dies. And I've got all sorts of geological stuff that shows my city of Cholula. There was a volcanic eruption on Popocatépetl right near the time of Christ. And that would have what would have made Zarahemla catch fire. Teotihuacan, I think we're out of time, so I'm not going to really go over this, but I've talked about this in other videos, how I think that's Laconia's city, and that's how it gets urbanized so incredibly quickly. He gathers all the people all at once. Even archaeologists are amazed. They're like, what on earth made everyone suddenly come and build this huge pre-planned city? It's like the Book of Mormon gives the best explanation. It was because, again, anti-robbers were putting so much pressure on the culture. He gathered everybody up, and so you have this massive 100,000 person city formed like overnight, within a 50-year period to get 100,000 people there, with some of the biggest pyramids in the world, right? And then it actually ends up matching better with the evidence that the Meso people use with Tikal and the militarization of Tikal. They think it's the Gadians coming and attacking them. And I say, no, it's Zarahemla. Because after the time of Christ, Zarahemla becomes the boss. After Christ comes and brings this century of prosperity, Zarahemla becomes the capital of the world. Like it is one of the biggest cities in the world. definitely the de facto capital of North America, and it extends its sway all the way up into the Heartland. Anyway, and I show kind of some evidence, even though some people conflict with that. Okay, so the last thing is my destructions, and I'm not going to go into that, but I have like a list of cities that I correlate. You can just see it here with the final flight of the Nephites going all the way from the Valley of Mexico to Zarahemla. And I have kind of two timelines that I play around with. One's kind of the traditional one of 400 AD, and another one is one with an alternate timeline. But yeah, if you ever, we'll do another video on this sometime. I have videos on this. People can kind of investigate this on their own and look up some of my other videos where I talk about the final flight, because it's kind of cool, because I'm seeing like dead bodies everywhere. Like culture after culture after culture all collapses within this 30-year period, all the way from the Valley of Mexico to Cumorah. Only problem is the Book of Mormon says it happens at 4 AD. The Archaeology says it's happening at 1050 AD. Why is the discrepancy? And I give a couple possibilities of why that is. But I mean, the trail of bodies is pretty convincing, especially when you mix in this fact that you find cannibalism. Just like the Book of Mormon says, you find the sacrifices of virgins, just like people said, hundreds of battles and dead bodies. Pretty cool. Matches with all sorts of other stuff. Okay, that's it. I'm not going to go into this stuff. Cahokia, like I mentioned before, Cahokia has something that sounds a whole lot like what it says happened in Moriantum, where you have all the daughters of the Lamanites, who are like.
So it's your position to kind of wrap up that Moroni just fled. Where in your model, where did he flee from and start walking to where he ended up in,
So in my model, Mormon would have began in Desolation, which is in the southwest, which is where the record vault and Shim and all that was. And then he was carried into Zarahemla by his father. And then the war starts in Zarahemla. And then over a 62-year period, they migrate up to Cumorah, right? Which when you think about the Saints went from New York to Utah, which is like 2,000 miles in like 49 years and built cities along the way, right? So I'm saying the Nephites had a longer period to do it. And they do the same thing. 60 years, they get pushed 3,000 miles. They build all these cities on the way. There's truces in the middle. They build up all these cultures. The Chacoan phenomenon happens where you have thousands of immigrants coming, right? And then they get pushed into the Mississippian lands, and then they all are destroyed. And you have this trail of carnage and blood, and then they get destroyed at Cumorah in New York. And then Moroni alone travels back to Utah, right? And because the Nimenha records even talk about that, right? So in the time period after he dies, he comes back to Utah and wanders about until he finally dies. Yeah. But when you think about it, like the plates had to be buried before, like he had to do the translation and bury the plates before the final battle. Because at the beginning of the Book of Moroni, he says like, I thought I wouldn't have lived this long, but since I'm still alive, I'm gonna translate the Book of Ether and leave you with a couple words.
Yeah, it's either that or he finds the Nemenha, goes back, and then starts writing again. Then he's like surprised I've lived this long. Can't believe that I've lived this long.
Yeah, but that's a huge statement, because if he thought he might have died in the final battle, if he's like, I thought I might have died, well then of course he was going to bury the book in Cumorah where God told him before the final battle even. Yeah. And then he's like, well, I'm still alive. I didn't die. I'm going to take the book back, write some more in it, and then I'll put it back after I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, interesting stuff. Yeah, no question that there's a lot there, and that may make sense that we don't have the same kind of infrastructure throughout North America, because these guys are probably just like, it's going to get destroyed anyways. It always gets destroyed, so let's not build anything that's built to last, because we just get kicked out of here anyways. So at least I could see them kind of thinking that. That's how I would feel. I'd be like, why waste our time building these amazing pyramids if we're just going to get destroyed and taken over? So, well, I hope that helps everybody kind of understand what the Weaver model is, what this, Continental model is.
People might need to rewatch it and play it a little bit in slow motion, and then just look into everything. I go to my website and get the details.
And that's what I would invite people to do is go to GatheredIn.One and he's got so much information there. There is just so much as it relates to everything that we've covered today. If you just start digging in, he's got tons of references, tons of resources. If Lance is going to cite something, he's going to have a reference for it. And that's what I appreciate. I think there's a lot of mental gymnastics being played out there with a lot of different things. And for me, it's always like, can you point to something? Can you give me a quote? Can you give me a scripture? And that's what I appreciate about what Lance has done with his model. Listen, we are going to be going to Mexico, and we want you to come with us. So if you missed this trip and you want to go on the next one, do it. We're going to do it soon. We're probably going to do it in the next 4, 5, 6 months. We're going to do it again. And so we will let you know the dates and the times as we kind of pin that down. By the time you watch this video, we'll know when it's going to be. So if you're interested, shoot us an email, say, hey, I'm interested. I know you're going to need the time frame. I would plan on late winter, early spring, sometime between February, March, April-ish time period. We're going to do this again. So email us at Zion Streaming if you want more information. I love going on these vacations. I'm really excited. My wife is joining, and she's going to get to see these sites I'm really excited about. So Lance, thank you again. And it's important for people to understand when you're out there with Lance, this gives you a great opportunity to ask questions about this model. And we do a lot on these tours and on these vacations, spending time to walk through these things while we're all out there together, spending time together. Again, it's part of our initiative to not just awaken, but to gather. And so when we gather, it seems to also awaken. And so there's something really powerful by gathering, by doing these things together, by enjoying these vacations, these trips, that can also give us some insights as to where the Book of Mormon took place. Lance, thanks again for giving us this overview, helping us kind of understand where your brain has been. I know you must drive your wife crazy. It's like a beautiful mind. He's got this slide and this thing and this. Did you see all the dots he's got? Every single one of those little dots is some kind of a site that he's identified, some kind of importance as it relates to history. I can't even say the guy's name that was, it starts with an IX. That's about how. Say that again.
Fernando Isli Sorchito.
Fernando. Perfect. I can say Fernando. I found that to be very, very interesting. I think it's worth taking a look at what our boy Fernando had to say, because it seems to align with the Book of Mormon. Hey, if you like this video and you're into Book of Mormon geography, share this around. Make sure you go visit Lance's site. Look at his other videos that he's got. Look at the other videos that we have on our site. If this is the first time you're catching Lance, we've done a ton of videos with him. You can go to our playlist. You can see all the videos we've ever done with Lance. It's right there. We talk about some other things too with Lance, which I really appreciate. Lance isn't just a geography guy. He's got a ton of other things too. Ancient records like the Colburn, down to the doctrine of eternal lives. We've discussed that with Lance. So there's a lot of cool things that you can learn. So go check Lance's other videos out as well. Also, shout out, Drea the Bomb is wearing her new sweater. And if you can see it, it says Scripture Study Sweater. So we have, it's wintertime. On the back, it says Zion Media right there. Listen, if you want to get a sweater, go to zionstreaming.com. You can order from our store your Scripture Study sweater. I promise you, you put one of those Scripture Study sweaters on. It's kind of like having, I don't know, it's kind of like the football player who wears his favorite socks. The more you study in that Scripture Study, so I got mine. I got my green Scripture Study sweater that I wear to study the scriptures in. I don't know, maybe these fabrics carry some knowledge with us. So get your Scripture Study sweater, start studying your scripture. Stay tuned. We're doing a lot of cool things. Shout out to, we have manuals available on our site. By the time this video airs, we have done a ton of work to put together some manuals in Isaiah. When I was in prison, the book of Isaiah just kind of opened up to me. And I have delayed, and I wrote everything down, and I have been delaying putting this together. I have pulled out my notes. We have turned it into teaching manuals. Right now I have Isaiah from Isaiah 41 to Isaiah 56, and we'll finish that off. You can at least read my commentary, kind of how I see it, especially those chapters. So we put these manuals together so you can kind of study the scriptures. And if you want to take a look at things through my lens, feel free to check those out and dive in. Studying the words of Isaiah is a commandment. And the Savior himself says Isaiah's words are great. And I think we're living in the day where his words will be fulfilled. So Lance, thanks again so much for all you do here at Zion Media and for just this information. It's incredible. For myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For Lance, Lancelot Weaver, and Drea the Bomb. We'll see you guys all next time.